Welcome to American Islamic College Academic Lecture Forum online. We cannot wait until we can do this in person again. I miss seeing everyone, but this is a great opportunity to also reach those who are in other states and even around the world. So welcome, welcome, welcome. So I will begin by introducing Dr. Emad Rahim, whom we're so honored to have this evening with us. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the discussion. Feel free to post questions in the chat box and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And then at the end of the event, you'll be receiving a feedback form from us. So we would love your feedback, and that will help us to continue to improve our lectures. So thank you. Without further ado, I'll now begin. Dr. Emad Rahim, born in a concentration camp, is a Khmer American and survivor of the Cambodian killing fields. He arrived to the United States with his family as a refugee living in Brooklyn, New York, and was raised in Syracuse, New York. After struggling with street violence, gangs, drugs, poverty, family abuse, and dyslexia as an adolescent, he found his way through higher education to become an award-winning educator, entrepreneur, author, and community leader. Rahim currently serves as the Kutuk Family Endowed Chair and Professor at Bellevue University and Dean of Social Impact at Claremont Lincoln University. He is an award-winning entrepreneur, educator, Fulbright recipient, and TEDx speaker. He was the former dean at Colorado Tech and Strayer University, entrepreneur in residence at Oklahoma State University and Syracuse University, and visiting scholar at Rutgers University. His life was turned into the short documentary Against the Odds. You can read more about Dr. Emad Rahim on our website. You can also check out Dr. Rahim's website for his latest work at www.emadrahim.com. Without further ado, please let us welcome Dr. Emad Rahim.
Good evening, everybody. I am honored and privileged to be here. So let me just share my screen really quick. All right. All right. So my name is Emad Rahim, but I was born Visna'an. I'm a genocide survivor. I was born in 1978 in the killing fields of Cambodia. On the day I was born, my father was being tortured and eventually executed. I had an older brother that died of starvation and illness. My mother and a group of people, after being in this concentration camp for over a year, made a plan to escape. But before they did so, my mother wanted to see my father before we leave. And she knew that he was going to be executed, but she wanted to take every risk possible to see him because she knew this would be the last time she would see him alive. So in the middle of the night, she snuck out and found the location of where he was imprisoned, and she was able to get access to him. And when she saw him, you know, she described someone she no longer knew. He had been tortured. He had been starving. He was lost, right? He was struggling with his own demons, obviously. And he had no idea who she was. So after trying to speak to him for several minutes, and she said it felt like hours, she started to walk away. And as she was walking away, he asked her a question that changed my life, right? A question that changed my entire story. And what I know about my story was he asked about me, right? So here's this man who did not recognize his wife, but was concerned about his son. He wanted to know how I was doing. He wanted to know if I was okay. And my mother said that I was fine, that I was doing well. And she said he smiled. And then she said he kind of drifted off, stared back at the wall. And that was the last time my mother saw my father alive. The escape from the concentration camp in Cambodia to Thailand took several days. They knew there was a refugee camp on the borders of Thailand, um, and they knew that it was risky. Um, but if they stayed in this concentration camp, they know that they would be executed also. So in the middle of the night, my mother, along with several families, decided to escape. There were several kids, including me, and on the journey, they feared that the Khmer Rouge, which is the communist army that was massacring the Cambodian people, would find them in the jungle. So throughout the days, throughout the nights, they would do their best to hide. They would do their best to be quiet. But my mother told me that on the journey, there was a group of people that stepped on a landmine not too far from her. And just like that, they lost several family members. I also got very sick to the point where I was no longer responding. I became pale. I became very, I was not responsive, right? Except for crying at night. My mother told me that in the middle of the night, while they were sleeping, I would cry constantly, right? To the point where she was so afraid of her life and everybody else's life, she would suffocate me to stop me from crying. She was afraid that the Khmer Rouge army would hear us. And she told me that one night when I was crying, she said the crying felt different. Right? She knew I was weak, but she said that the crying sound more like moaning, and she thought she was losing me. And also people that were with her told her that I was dying, that it might be best just to leave me in the jungle. When they woke up that night, said that they were actually sleeping around a pile of bodies and bones. And she always said she thinks that that's why my cry sound very different, very, very like I was alerting the families that were there. Now we eventually got to the refugee camp. Now, I wish I could say that was a happy ending. Like I wish I could say that once we got to the refugee camp, we found salvation, that everything went great, that everything went according to plan. But the refugee camp was almost as bad as the concentration camp, right? This was a lawless environment. People were being abused and taken advantage of. My mother told me stories of women just disappearing and sometimes kids disappearing and men going off to work and never coming back. But one of the amazing things when it comes to these refugee camps, people find hope, people find connections, people create family. And my mother discovered my stepfather. And at the refugee camp, uh, they got married, and my sister was born. And eventually, like a lot of Asian families, we just started adopting people, right? And all of a sudden, I got a and I got an older sister that we adopted. These are people that also lost families. And one of the great things about having a family, especially a big family that is intact, you're more likely to get sponsored. You're more likely to get a green card. And that's exactly what happened, right? We ended up celebrating because we got a green card to come to America. Now, I wish I could say that was a happy ending. Like, I wish I could say that once we got to America, we lived this American dream and everything went according to plan. But, they didn't put us out in the suburbs. Right? They didn't put us out in, middle class, a middle class community, right? They put us in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, New York in the 80s, right? This is like Brooklyn before Beyonce and Jay-Z like moved in, right? This is like old Brooklyn in the 80s at the height of the crack epidemic, right? At the height of the Bronx being burnt down, right? There was gang warfare all over Brooklyn. And it seemed like everybody was at odds in Brooklyn. Right? The borough that I lived in, Sunset Park, Brooklyn, on 61st Street, was predominantly Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, and Haitians. It seems like everybody hated each other. But the one cool thing that I remember about Sunset Park, Brooklyn, was the block parties. And every summer, it was like a Spike Lee movie, right? The YMCA and the city would shut down my street. And overnight, the street became this amazing party where everyone that had problems with each other the day before set those problems aside. And the only thing they were fighting about was whose barbecue was better. Like, my barbecue is better than your barbecue, or my merengue, right, is better than your salsa. And all of a sudden, these people that had conflict with each other celebrated each other's culture, celebrate each other's music. And my favorite thing was, because I can't swim. I can't swim with nothing. But the greatest thing was when the fire department used to come and they turned the fire hydrants on. And I would sit underneath that fire hydrant for hours and just sit in the puddle of water and just watch this community, just watch this community enjoy the space with each other. Just music, smell of barbecue, kids laughing, everyone's playing. But then one day, everything changed. And I remember it felt like silence came over this party. And in a blink of an eye, it felt like everybody around me that was playing with me disappeared. And that silent turned into screams. And all of a sudden, people were running all over the place. All I heard was screaming, people running, cars were honking. And I got confused and I was unsure where I was at. And I'm starting to get worried. So I got up and I started walking towards the housing unit that I live in. And as I got closer, there was a group of people that was standing in front of my stoop. And as I got closer, I could hear the commotion getting louder. And I could see this group of people pushing each other, cursing at each other, screaming at each other. And everybody around them was running. But I was too young to understand what was happening. I just wanted to get home. I just wanted to go past these people and get inside my building. And as I got closer and closer, and all of a sudden I heard boom. And I just remember this noise, this loud bang. And then all of a sudden, everything became silent. It felt like my ears were on fire. It felt like my face was on fire. And there was smoke everywhere. And I tried to run, but it felt like everything was moving very slow. And as I was trying to escape and get as far as away as I can, I walked towards another building where the door had opened. And there was this Puerto Rican man that I know from the neighborhood. He was standing outside and I could see him from a distance. He's like, Mira, mira, Maraki, mira, mira, mira. So I started walking towards him, and there was still smoke. There were still people screaming and running. And as I entered the doorway, he closed the door behind me, and I saw a group of people standing on the stairway, and they were screaming, and they were crying, and they were pointing at me. And I looked down at my leg, and half of my leg was shot off. And I blacked out. When I woke up, the community had gotten together again, but this time they were working together to save my life. I remember people holding me down. There was a lot of different languages being spoken. Someone had took off his shirt and tied my leg together. And then they tried to find a taxi cab, and someone else tried to find my mother. And when the taxi cab came, a fight broke out between the taxi driver, the Puerto Rican man, and a group of people from the community. And I realized later on that they were fighting with the taxi driver because he wanted to know who was paying this cab fare and who was going to clean his cab after this. Right? And I blacked out again. When I woke up, I was in the taxi cab, and there was an African American man sitting next to me, and he was holding his stomach. I just remember seeing blood everywhere. And he kept on saying, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Please, please help me. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Help me. I can't breathe. And I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I was in the bed. And I found out that guy in the ambulance next to me had died. And an argument happened between the nurses and the doctors because I was a minor and my parents were not around and they didn't have my medical history. So they didn't know if I was allergic to any type of medication, but they needed to stitch me up right away. They needed to perform surgery because I had lost so much blood. So they decided to stitch me without any anesthesia. So I remember clearly just them holding me down and feeling every stitch going into my leg. And the pain was so bad that I blacked out, woke up, blacked out, woke up. It took my mother a full day and a half to find me. Remember, this is the 80s before people had cell phones. This is even before beepers, right? She had to go to several hospitals to find me. But because of that situation and because of the environment we were living in, my mother made the decision to move us. She knew that there was no way that her son would live and survive in this city like this. So after my recovery, my mother made the decision to move to Syracuse, New York. Now, once again, I wish I could say there was a happy ending. I wish I could say that once we moved to Syracuse, New York, everything got better. We moved to the suburbs, but we went from one housing project to another. We went from living in a disenfranchised, economically challenged community to another one. And in Syracuse, New York, we faced very similar challenges, just a lot smaller. And I started getting into a lot of trouble. right? I started acting out, and my stepfather started becoming very abusive. And the abuse kept on getting worse. Right? One day, he had gotten fired from his job. He came home, he went to my bedroom, took my bed sheets, took them to the backyard with my clothes, and set them on fire. And he told me that he lost his job because I was bad luck, that I am causing all of the negative things that was happening to the family. And he told me that he was going to kill me when I go to sleep. So at 12 years old, I packed up my book bag, put little clothes I had, and $40 in my pocket and ran away. And for the next 2 weeks, 12 years old, I was homeless. I went to school to eat, to sleep, and tried to stay at school as long as I can. In the evenings, I try to find a park bench. I try to make like a fort to sleep in. I remember sleeping behind a bush a lot until eventually I got really tired, scared, lonely, and my oldest sister, the one that we adopted, found me. And for the next few years, I lived with her. Now, fast forward to me being 14. And like most 14s, I was a juvenile delinquent, causing a lot of issues, causing a lot of problems, smoking a lot of weed, and engaged in a lot of gang like activities. And I remember I got into a lot of trouble in school to the point where they were looking to kick me out of school. Right? I got into a lot of fights. By this time, me and my stepfather got into a fight, and I beat him up pretty badly because he had beaten my mom pretty badly. He was beating my siblings, so I fought back, and because of that, he was gone. Right, so he left us. And at 14, I felt like I needed to be the man of the house, so I started selling drugs to help my mother. I started engaging in late night gang like activities. I would go to school. I would try to find any side jobs I could as a 14, 15-year-old, doing the news route, things like that. And then at night, I would help my friends sell crack. And I remember going to school one day, and there was a race riot that happened between the Puerto Rican kids and the black kids. And the riot, or at least they call it a riot, right? It caused two kids to get stabbed and another kid to get beaten up pretty badly. So they brought in a mediation team to come mediate this situation, to do conflict resolution. And they didn't know what ethnicity I was, right? I was always this damn ambiguous looking kid. So when I came into school that day, they told me that I had to go to the office and look up my name to see which mediation group I was going to be in, if I was going to be with the Puerto Rican kids or the black kids. So I went to the office and I looked at this list, and they put my name on both places, right? So they didn't know my ethnicity, so they ended up putting me with the Puerto Rican kids and the black kids at the same time. But the great thing and the cool thing was both groups accepted me, right? I was the only kid that was able to see and hear both sides of the story. And because both groups trusted me and I had friends in both groups, I was able to help mediate that conflict. But during one of the mediation sessions, there was a man by the name of Willie Dardell, someone that I really respected, someone that I admired, someone that has always looked out for me and treated me like a son. And when he was mediating this group that included me, I had a life-changing moment. During our conversation, he asked the group, when do drug dealers make the most money? Now, I know the answer to this, right? I not only know the answer to this, but I also thought it was funny, right? Now, during this period, Bone Thugs and Harmony, the rap group, was like the biggest, right, hip hop group out there. And they had this song called First of the Month, right? So when he asked that question, I jokingly started singing it. I was like, it's the first of the month, wake up, wake up. So I started singing this, and all my friends started laughing. And Mr. Dardell never did this. I've never seen him do this. He lost his temper and he screamed at me. And he goes, what the hell are you laughing at? Why is this funny to you? And I stood still, right? Because it shocked me. And he goes, Emad, let me ask you a question. Do you like kids? And I paused and I was like, where's this coming from? Why is he asking me if I like kids? And he goes, I'm asking you, Emad, because I know that you take care of your siblings. I've seen you with young kids, and you seem to be very concerned and tentative, right? You're very responsible when it comes to young people. I said, yeah, I like kids. I volunteer at the YMCA. I have no problem with kids. I love kids. And he goes, you know what? I know what you do, man. And have you ever thought of what you're doing to the community? Have you ever thought about that little kid that is starving? Because mother took an entire month's worth of food stamps to pay for drugs. And now that kid is starving. And now that kid's alone. And you contribute to that. You caused that. And while he was there in front of all of us, it felt like he was just with me. And I became very disappointed in myself. No one have ever spoke to me like that. And because I admired him and respected him so much, this was a very new feeling to me. And I started crying. And I didn't care who was there. And I cried and cried, and I just couldn't stop crying to the point where I ran out of the room. And that was the day everything changed. And I kind of went cold turkey. Like I stopped hanging out with the same people. I stopped speaking to the same people. I started focusing on my education. I started focusing on my school. And that's when I started reading. And I discovered the biography of Malcolm X. And I remember reading that book, and I couldn't stop reading. And his story, that was very different than mine, felt so close to what I was experiencing, felt so personal, felt so personable. I just couldn't stop reading. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I couldn't stop thinking about Islam. So after I got done reading about Malcolm X, I started reading Muhammad Speaks. I started reading old Final Calls, started watching his videos, and started learning about the Nation of Islam. And then one day I decided to go to a Nation of Islam meeting. And after sitting there for about an hour and a half, I realized this is not the Islam that Malcolm was talking about towards the end of the book. So I started trying to figure out this thing called Sunni Islam. But there was not a lot of publications out there that was accessible to me. But I knew that there was a guy by the name of Anjan who ran a store on the corner, uh, maybe 4 blocks from where I live and 2 blocks from the school. So I made it my mission to speak to Anjan, right? Like I've seen him. I know that he's Muslim. I want to know if he's Sunni Islam, that he practiced Sunni Islam. So one day I went into the store and I didn't see Anjan, but the store was open. But it seemed like no one was there. And then over the counter, I saw him and he was praying. And I thought it was powerful because he is praying and not looking after the store. Because I could have stole everything in that store. Right? I could have stole everything. I could have just walked out. There's no cameras. There's no, there's no one there. But here he was, praying behind the counter. So I said, why not? So I just prayed with him. So I jumped over the counter, got behind him, and just followed his lead. And when he got done, he looked behind me. He's like, he's like, who's this kid? So he goes, you Muslim? I was like, no. I said, I'm learning about Islam, and it just felt right. It just felt that I need to pray with you. And he said he loved me. He said Islam loves me. He said, embracing Islam going forward, that all my bad deeds would be forgiven. And he was someone that did not know me, could care less about my background, could care less what I've done, and embraced me and accepted me. And for the next few months, he educated me about Islam. And I prayed with him after school. I remember sitting behind the counter, reading the Quran, reading Tawheed, asking questions. I think he was taking advantage of me too, because I eventually started working for him. He didn't pay me. uh, his family was Palestinian, and they were also amazing. They would invite me to dinner. Like I've never eaten that much in my life. I learned about their culture, history. Then one day, Anjan was like, I think you're ready. And I was like, ready for what? He's like, he's like, if you are ready, you need to take your Shahada. I was like, and I was like, I don't know if I'm ready. He's like, no, you, I think you're ready. Right? Do you love Islam? It's like, yeah. Do you feel like you ready to be a Muslim? I was like, yeah. He's like, then you're ready to take Shahada. So he took me to the masjid. And, I thought I was going to, I thought like, because I've read Malcolm X, I grew up in Catholicism. I went to Sunday school. I thought that I was going to experience some of baptism, right? I thought it was going to be, this long process, um, And he never explained to me what the Shahada was going to be. So we got there, and as a Juma, so we got there, he introduced me to a bunch of people. And after prayed, he called Iman Kabasi up, and he said, Iman Kabasi, this young man wants to accept Islam. And Kabasi, very, very tall, intimidating figure, big beard, he looked at me with this beautiful smile. And he goes, are you sure you're ready? It's going to change your life. You're going to have to change a lot of things. What do you know about Islam? So we had this long conversation, and he called everybody to come back into the masjid. And he's like, this young man is about to take a shahada. So we all need to be here to celebrate it. And I said the shahada, and it was like what, 3 minutes. And but that 3 minutes changed my life. And I went from this lost young man to a very focused person, right? And I went from this kid that was always getting into trouble, that was always trying to find himself, that was always trying to be a man of the house, right? That was always trying to prove himself to his friends. I no longer felt like I needed to do that. And one of the beautiful things about Islam is how quickly you become part of a community. And praying side by side was and still is the most beautiful experience for me. You become very vulnerable. You lose your space, your personal space really quickly. And hearing everyone pray for each other in the same direction, side by side, 5 times a day, is something that gives me strength. And it's so moving and powerful that it allowed me to refocus my energy towards something bigger, something greater than myself. So when I was 21 years old, I got married. I met and wed my wife in a month, right? And that was 21 years ago, right? So we've been married for 21 years, met and wed in a month. And we have both gone through this journey of Islam together, and she's also read the book, the Malcolm X biography, and we, have our ups and downs in regards to our deen, but the foundations of Islam has always brought us back together, right? And kept us, in the path of creating unity, of really establishing a ummah together. So going back to the situation when I accepted Islam, right? Because I kind of lost track of my story because I got very emotional. But after I did my shahada, I was trying to figure out how to tell my mother. Right? I was like, how do I tell this Cambodian woman that I embraced Islam? Like, how do I explain this to her, right? So I thought about it, I was thinking about it. I spoke with the Imam. He's like, you just got to talk about the basics, don't go into deep about it. Don't scare, don't intimidate us. So I went to my mother. I was like, Mom, something happened today. I went to this place called the Masjid, and I embraced Islam. And she asked me a few questions. And she sat back And she goes, uh, you know we're Muslims already, right? I was like, what are you talking about? She was like, yeah, we're Muslims. I was like, how are we Muslims? How is that possible? How can we Muslims when I didn't know we were Muslims, right? I just converted into Islam. And she goes, I mean, didn't you realize we're Muslims because we didn't eat pork, right? So I was like, what does this got to do with anything? I just thought we just didn't like pork. We went to church. I went to Sunday school, right? I spent a lot of time in the Catholic churches. And then she explained to me that in Cambodia, Islam is like an ethnicity. It wasn't uncommon for people to say that they are half Muslims and half Cambodian because they treat it like an ethnicity, like it's part of your culture. And during the genocide, during the Khmer Rouge war, Muslims were being massacred, just like teachers, just like Christians, and a lot of the Muslims started hiding their identity because of this. So when my mother got to the States, she thought the churches was part of American culture. She didn't realize it was a religion. She was like, you want to eat. We went to school. We went to, we went to Sunday school because they had programs, they had field trips. You want clothes and presents. We went to Christmas gatherings, right? You wanted to be educated, right? You wanted to learn English. So we went to Catholic school. It was free, right? All of our sponsors that we lived with for a period of time were Catholics. So in my mother's eyes, Catholicism was a part of the American culture. And if you wanted to be American, you had to embrace this way of life. But she didn't really made the connection. She was like, we were always Muslims. We didn't pray because we kind of lost our way, but we're still Muslim. That's part of our identity. And it allowed me to kind of rediscover this history. And I realized I had family back in Cambodia that were named Muhammad and Yusuf, and we end up raising a good amount of money to build a masjid and a farm back in Cambodia. And there's a growing, vibrant Muslim community in Cambodia. And we also have a strong history and legacy in Cambodia when it comes to Islam because of its proximity to Indonesia and Malaysia. And because of my revert, right? Because since I realized I'm not technically a convert, I'm a revert, my entire family embraced Islam again, right? And our family started growing, and I have two amazing daughters, Sophia Abdul Rahim and Saria Abdul Rahim. My sister married Al Java Abdul Kida. So our family is growing. It's a strong Muslim ummah. And because I discovered this history and this past, I ended up being a part of a documentary, and that documentary turned into a TED talk, and that TED talk turned into a book, and it had brought me like across the country, speaking at commencements, speaking at graduations, speaking at events, all throughout different universities and high schools and Islamic centers and things like that. And the coolest thing is I got a chance to speak at the United Nations. I got a chance to speak at a United Nations commission and was given an award by the United Nations Foundation for the social impact and civic engagement that I was a part of. And all that came from just rediscovering my history of Islam and my connections of Islam. So I attribute my discovery for Islam that goes back to reading the biography of Malcolm X and finding a connection, a meaningful connection in his stories. This lost Cambodian kid that grew up in a predominantly Black community found salvation in that book. And I his words, his speeches, his life continues to mold my way of thinking, and future generations. Right? And it was the support of Anjan and his family and Mr. Dardell that also helped shape my journey into Islam and me becoming a man. So I thank you, everyone, for your time, for the opportunity to speak to you, and I hope you enjoyed my story. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that powerful sharing of your journey with all of us. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of everyone, but I'm sure we're all feeling very moved. And yes, a chat, powerful testimony, absolutely. I'd like
Thank you.
to, thank you. I'd like to open it up for questions. You can use the chat box. I think that would be the easiest so that we can make sure we're getting everybody. But since it is a small group and you feel to do so, you can also unmute yourself and ask a question. Thank you.
What did I do in Oklahoma State University? So I was an entrepreneur in residence. I spent almost 2 years. I would fly back and forth to Tulsa and Stillwater. And it's just to help entrepreneurs. This included students, military veterans, and small business owners, kind of mentor them, support them, guide them, provide resources and things like that. It was an amazing experience. I met some wonderful people. Um, and in Syracuse University, actually two of the startups that I mentored actually ended up at Shark Tank. So that is very exciting stuff. Alhamdulillah. Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
We can take a couple more questions.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment if that's okay. Hey, Ramona, honey, nice
Yes,
to
please.
see you. Miss you. And thank you so much, Dr. Emad. This was really, really very touching. So first, thanks for being very vulnerable and sharing with us from the bottom of your heart stories. I love to listen to the trials and triumphs that you've been through. And I love the fact how you continued repeating how such life lessons could be shared all across different age groups, races, ethnicities, religions, etc. So really what could be a takeout for me is no matter where we go, no matter who we are, having to find the courage to reflect upon our choices and find ways to seek refuge within the communities we live in, not necessarily the communities that we share a lot with, sometimes even the ones we do not, open such wonderful doors of hope. Thank you so much, really, and I really hope you continue to find more and more way to engage and share with others, especially the vulnerable youth who need to listen, need to find like real heroes in their lives, the ones that been through tough times and emerged and continue to find ways to support their voices. So thank you so much. It was really very touching.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Dr. Imad, I have a question. Where can folks find the documentary?
So if you go to YouTube and you search my name, you put Emad, Emad, Rahim, Rahim, and you put against the odds. Against the odds. If you put my name, it would show up. Just look up against the odds.
Thank you. All right, we can take one more question before we close. One more question.
Well, I'd just like to say I grew up in Oklahoma. And when I was in high school, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and it was a life changing event for me also. And I found it very interesting to hear your story through the encounter of that book and what it awakened for you.
Yeah, I had to watch the movie afterwards because there was so much things that that I didn't understand. But the book was better than the movie at the end of the day.
No,
Definitely better.
absolutely.
There's a question, Dr. Emad, how is your connection with Muslim community in Cambodia? Do you visit Cambodia?
So yes, so my mother has a house there, and like I mentioned, we raised money to build a masjid and a farm out there. I'm the only family member that have not been back yet. Everybody has been back except me. I think it's a qadar of Allah because every time I made plans to go back, something happened. I made plans and actually bought tickets to go back 4 times, and each time something happened in my life, whether it was the birth of my daughters, or we had to relocate to a different state for a job. Something happened. So and then and I was planning to go last year and then quit happened. So I don't know. Maybe Allah is trying to tell me something. But hopefully one day I want to go back. I need to go back. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Sharing stories. It's it takes a lot, right? But it's the stories that connects us, right? It's not our titles. It's not what school we went to, right? It's our personal journey in life. That's what connects us. And I realized that sharing your story, it can create an addictive space and like an addictive environment because then other people want to share their stories, right? Because then they find connections in your journey based on your dates, based on your experience, based on where you went, based on what you eat, and now they feel that they can connect with you as a person, not based on what you want from them, right? Not based on who you know, but it's that journey that you took to get where you are at today, where people find a common space in, right? And when you are vulnerable, then people feel like they could be vulnerable, and I think that's the most powerful thing is, is being in front of people that don't know you, that are very protective of their space. They may not even want to be here. Like they may not want to be there to listen to you. And then as soon as you share your story and you see people's facial expression, you see people lean in and you see people kind of whisper at each other and you see people cry with you realize how small of a space this is and how close you are with these people. And all of a sudden, everybody wants to share their story. All of a sudden, everybody wants to find meaningful connections with each other. So I think what's great about Islam, it has, praying with strangers and eating with strangers often, right? Especially during, Ramadan, it makes you vulnerable. It makes you learn to be vulnerable, right? And I think vulnerability is a powerful tool because it also teaches young people that they also can be vulnerable and still be themselves.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story. I mean, there's some comments here. I'm a Muslim from Cambodia. It's nice to hear about the story. Hope to see you in Cambodia, inshallah, God willing. You are an inspiration. Thank you so much. Your insight about the power of sharing stories is spot on. Yes, those are so powerful because for everything, all the reasons that you just shared, I mean, it's that human connection. And first reach out is so important. Then you reach back. Well said. Agreed. Thank you so much, Dr. Emad Rahim, for sharing, for being vulnerable. I mean, that it must be painful to have to go there and share in that way, but it's I think important. And I do wonder if it's part of maybe your healing as well through some of that. If you want to speak a little bit about that.
Oh, this is definitely therapy, right? I struggle with anxiety, and several years ago, I had I didn't know that I struggled with anxiety, but I had a panic attack. I thought I was having a heart attack, and I was in another country. I was in Costa Rica, and I thought something was happening to my body. I came back to America, was afraid to even go to the masjid because something told me I can't go anymore. It was, and I remember just going to the doctor over and over and over again and getting every single test possible, every blood work possible, for them to tell me that nothing was wrong with me. And then finally he told me that you think I had a social anxiety. That's possible, right? How the heck I have social anxiety? I speak in front of people for a living. I'm built for this, right? I mean, I think that's one of the things about growing up in a certain space, growing up a certain way, growing up in an abusive household. You think that you are built for it, right? That you are strong enough to take this abuse, that you are strong enough to see the things that you have seen, the things that you have experienced, and not go through therapy and never heal. And it took a lot of time and pressure from my wife for me to go into therapy. And after a year of therapy, I got better, you know. So healing is very important. It's something that people that experience trauma, I always tell them that they have to deal with it, that they have to work at it. It doesn't disappear, right? No one's built for it, right? Regardless how strong you are, you're not built for it. So it's important to heal yourself, take care of yourself, and find ways to to overcome that experience. So yes, so being on stage definitely feels like therapy sometimes. You guys are lucky that there was no like snot involved, because I was I was crying emotionally, and I was doing my best to keep all that stuff back.
Bless you, bless you, bless you. A couple more comments. I don't know if you can see those. Farhad says, I've been in Cambodia and stayed there for 8 months teaching. It's a very good country, very friendly people. Lots of different faiths and harmony. Yeah. Inshallah,
That's awesome.
God willing, you'll be able to make it back when the time is right.
Inshallah, there's a Muslim museum I read in Phnom Penh. So the Islamic culture, is recognized, and it's continued to grow in Cambodia.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's great. Well, thank you again so much. Hopefully we can do this in person sometime, God willing. And thanks everyone for attending this talk. And I'll be sending you a feedback form. If you could kindly fill that out and give us your input, that would be greatly appreciated. And stay tuned for more events from AIC.